Well, I'm Scott Cuthbert with Gary Wong, and we're back to another episode of the Uncertainty of Show. And want to give a shout out to our special guest today, Zach Granzow. Just an extra little plug. Zach's been, a member of the Safeopedia community, the Safety Connect community since day one. I know I've spent hours picking his brain and getting his insights and ideas on things. So really excited to have him officially, share. Well, he's presented at Safety Connect, but have him officially share his thoughts and insights today on Gary's podcast, The Uncertainty of. So, with that, I will jump in and just say, hey, like if you're joining for the first time, we'll do a quick refresher. So we began our, Uncertainty of Show series with a diagram showing the three basic systems in the real world: complex, chaos, and order. And then later, Gary introduced the Canavan framework to give us a deeper look at what really happens in the real world. And experts like safety professionals are in the complicated domain, and here they analyze risk with which are the known unknowns, create safety policy, standards, rules, processes, develop best practices, and the frontline workers are in the clear domain and work with known knowns like best practices to get their work done with certainty. The domain in the middle is called confused, the state of not knowing where you are. When you hear someone say, we're in chaos all the time, it's probably more true that they're in the confused domain, feeling angst and not sure what to do next. So the topic today is the uncertainty of measuring safety performance, questions that you may have causing uncertainty in your mind. Why do we have this inherent need to measure safety performance? What value are you getting from safety metrics you are tracking, and how can you adapt at a performance system that enables safety, not danger, to emerge? So Gary, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Zach and jump into the conversation today.
Well, thanks, Scott. And I think, Scott, you already did a bit of introduction for Zach. So let me just pipe in and say that I was really pleased that you connected me with Zach. Zach is the safety manager at Mobile Track Solutions. And I'm always interested in if finding people that think similar to what I do. In this particular case, looking at safety measurement. And I must admit, we kind of like hit it off and we're quite in sync. So I hope people will enjoy our little back and forth today as we support each other. So let me start by saying I often hear people use the terms measures and metrics interchangeably. Well, Zach, can you start off by telling us what's the difference between the two?
So thanks for the introduction, Gary. The way I see metrics and measures is that for measures, I see them as a numerical value that are assigned to a standard unit to give them meaning. Otherwise, they're just a symbol. So saying the value is 1 means nothing without context. 1 what? Are we talking apples, oranges, or are we talking about something completely different? And we can't derive any meaning from that number. Likewise, using the phrase comparing apples to oranges highlights that even when values appear to be similar, so if we have 1 apple, 1 orange, their units must have the same meaning to have a meaningful comparison. So when we get into the metrics have a means of assessing and comparing those measures that we've put in place to gain the information and some insight. They're typically developed around a desire to know or better understand the performance or progress of a system. Monitors are a visualization of those numerical values plotted or traced across a graph chart to assist with seeing what the development of the patterns that we can visualize that, because our brains tend to see in pictures. So it helps us put the data in picture form so then we can see and understand it a little bit better. It also can be used as a recognition when we see that there's a change happening without an exact amount of data to explain the perceived change. This is where we begin to just know that there's something wrong, but we can't explain why that we have that feeling or that inkling that there is something out of the ordinary.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when people say monitoring, we first think about what we see with our eyes. But now monitoring is kind of taking on, what are you feeling? What are you smelling? What are you tasting now? So all the senses are there. It's what we talk a bit about is, you know, making sense of what's going on. And like you said, it's not more than numbers. Well, here's how we think about measuring monitoring. In the
Gary, can I jump in for one?
Yeah.
1 second. We just see the slide. We don't see you. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that was purposeful. So
okay, sorry.
Yeah, this is me now.
Yeah, sorry. We'll cut that out, but sorry.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Yeah. So this one here shows about how we think about measuring monitoring in each of the Cynefin domains. So when they're clear to me, we typically, as Zach, you said, we see a hard number. It's a metric of safety performance. And that makes you think of the quote, what gets measured gets done, right? Very common sort of thing. In the complicated domain, experts try to imagine uncertainty, but what we have are known knowns, and that's what we call risk. So when we think of risk, we can think of risk as in the typical risk assessment matrix. We know there's a risk we've identified, but we don't know for sure how big it is. So what we do is that we assign a probability or frequency, and typically it's high to low. Then we also look at the magnitude or severity, minimal to catastrophic. So then we can create this chart diagram, and we can have a session on whether these things are useful or not. But that's what experts come up with to do to try to talk about risk. In the complex domain, and if you saw in the complex domain, I do like Yogi Berra's saying, you know, you can observe a lot, you know, just by watching. Now, in the complex domain, this is where safety projects seeking new solutions begin. So we're less interested in performance and curious how people respond to trial and error experiments. So we don't measure quantitative data, but we monitor qualitatively by observing, collecting anecdotal feedback, and getting a sense of what's going on. Now, accidents are in the chaotic domain, and in the chaotic domain, what we got is there's really no time to measure. The whole thing about there is you got to get out as quickly as possible. Now, in Cynefin, we explain an accident as a worker in the clear domain, getting too close to the edge, and then falling into the chaotic domain. So accidents are always unexpected surprises. So no time to measure, and we scramble to get out of here as fast as possible and restore safe operations. So I think what we want to do is start by addressing Scott's first question. Why do we have this inherent need to measure safety performance? So I just want to take a few minutes, and some people may have seen this slide I presented in past sessions. Let me do a bit of a quick history lesson in the evolution of business practices. I'm going back to 1931, when Herbert Heinrich published his industrial accident prevention book, A Scientific Approach. He released this in the era of scientific management. Now, we know back then, making money was the focus, and accountants measured profitability as the key metric. Safety, well, it was just one more thing to measure because it affected labor productivity. Accident statistics were needed to manage WCB premiums and claims. To reduce this cost of doing business and increase profits, emphasis in safety performance was on fixing what goes wrong. And how do we do that? Well, we look for the people that are making mistakes, and we blame and we punish them. Now, in the 1950s, we evolved into systems thinking and viewed humans not as throwaway cogs in a machine, but as hazards, hazards to be controlled. With advances in computer hardware and software, an engineering paradigm was adopted, and the metrics became faster, cheaper, better. Now, personally, I was deeply into business process reengineering in the mid-90s, reducing work into people, process, technology, fixing each part, and then putting them back together. Progress definitely was happening, but there's also many IT failures where faster, cheaper, better didn't materialize. So as you follow the curve, that leads to people saying, well, looks like we've peaked. We got to find another better way to do things. And the engineering paradigm is safety. That led to resilience engineering and efforts to measure when things not go wrong, but when things go right. So Zach, this is my brief history lesson. How have you, what's your experience been?
Well, it's been my experience that safety metrics are often skewed, manipulated, or villainized or outright ignored, despite the requiring routine of safety reports and challenging the accuracies of those reports. I've seen some of the best of intentions of implementing some leading indicators such as safety observations, near miss reporting with corrective actions, and employee engagements as a safety initiative. However, these have always tended to end up with shame, blame, silence, and disengagement, much to the irony of the engagement desire. I see this as a challenge to how do we move beyond just having safety at the table, whether it be at the table for the C-suite, at the table for the management level. And yet I can even hear some of our listeners going, but I haven't even gotten a seat at the table yet. How can I even say that we need to move beyond that aspect? But I look at it as we need to move at the aspect of how do we prove through measurable data that safety operations are driving the quality and efficiencies and the profitabilities of the company. We have to start speaking a different language, not just to the direct reports, but also to the C-suite. This is where the real opportunity is, and shifting the focus from counting failures to recognizing and reinforcing what is actually working for the organization that I'm a part of. If we look at Jerry Muller's book, The Tyranny of Metrics, he coined the term metric fixation, which is where we're always focusing on what's the data tell us, what's the number showing, what's the trend. And he explores the pitfalls that come from that metric fixation, being too narrowly focused on the metrics and the unintended consequences that comes from it. Metrics advocate accountability, which infers that we have the ability to count something, but accountability means to give an account of actions. When we start measuring the results, it becomes often counterproductive, and the belief that what is possible and desirable through these metrics replaces the need for any judgment to be acquired or reliance on personal experiences that have helped shape where we have come within that organization. The metrics are numerical indicators of corporate comparative performances based upon standard data, benchmarking, and the like. And when we start comparing ourselves from a number standpoint, it goes back to my example of apples to oranges. Well, I can paint an apple orange, but it doesn't change its concept of being an apple of what it is. So we can't compare industry numbers to other industry numbers when we're looking at it, because how that number was derived comes about through different other variables. And the belief that this is the best way of motivating people, it creates that reward of paid for performance, and thus we're modifying and manipulating the metrics to give us that better looking number. Again, putting on an orange skin over top of an apple.
Yeah, really, really good points. And we're going to delve deeper in some of those things that you said, Zach. So and thanks for your insights on how you've seen how metrics and measures have changed, some for the good, but probably a lot for the not so good over the years. Well, let's now move on to Scott's second question. What value are you getting from safety metrics that you are tracking? Now, there's different ways that we can categorize measures and metrics and look at that. I think, though, most people are familiar with the terms lagging and leading. So let's use that. So, Zach, let's start by asking you, what are lagging measures?
Lagging is just like what it sounds like. It's coming from behind. We're looking backwards at our performance or the events at a point in time. And there isn't much that we can do with those metrics. And to bring this into perspective, some of the common lagging indicators that we may be familiar with are like the OSHA regulatory measures of the TRIR, total recordable incident rate, or TCIR, total recordable or total case incident rate. There's also the frequencies of OSHA recordable incidences per 100 people. That's how the TRIR is calculated, or the TCIR, or then the lost time frequency rate with LTIFR, which is based off of 1 million hours worked. And I've seen that one happening and being more used in European organizations. And having had to work both US and European, I had to run 2 separate metrics to compare and show where we stood as an organization, and also as we stood as an organization within a specific country.
Interesting. When I was researching stuff for this episode, I realized that 20 years ago, Dan Peterson, in his book, Measurement of Safety Performance, he questioned the value of OSHA lagging indicators, and he cited several flaws. One, in smaller companies, and of course, this is what Safeopedia focuses on, the smaller companies, OSHA measures have little statistical validity and really measure luck, not performance. OSHA measures are not diagnostic. They don't suggest why an organization is performing better or worse. And the last one he said is, you're not going to gain anything just by measuring your failures. Zach, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, these metrics just are just numbers, more or less, and they're always behind. But they're also sending a message, because we're focusing on reporting of the number of failures that we incurred, and people don't want to fail. They want to be successful. That's our inherent desire. And so when we're seeing these numbers climb up of, whoop, I failed again, I failed again, it's sending the message of, don't report a failure, keep quiet, so then the numbers start looking better. It creates that, because we were always looking for reducing that failure count versus getting better at our operations. I'd rather fail up and fail better each time and make those small steps to improve the process versus just trying to get the numbers better. I can even change a number. If I have 2 incidences, but my number of employees is low, I'm going to have a higher ratio than compared to somebody who has 100 times that number of employees, or has even worked 1,000 times more hours than I've worked. So by simply changing the calculation, I've just brought a big number into a small number value without changing anything to improve the situation. So I've manipulated the data in that sense.
Yeah, and something that Eric Holnagel pointed out when he started to look at this lagging sort of measures, he talked a bit about coining the term safety one. And safety one is all about looking at things that go wrong. And his big question is, why do we do this? Because how often do we have an accident? It's not like we go to work and we have a whole pile of accidents on a daily basis. Most of the time, we're quite successful in getting work done safely, and everybody gets home. And we seem to ignore that data. why don't we look at where all that data is as opposed to the little bit of data? And that leads us into thinking about leading measures, where leading indicators provide early signals about the direction in which things are heading, allowing decision makers then to take proactive actions. So as you said, Zach, lagging is about looking maybe through the rearview window in your car. Leading is looking through your front window, looking at what's coming ahead and so what we can do about that. That is taking on a lot more prominence. And some leading indicator examples would be, okay, crew compliance visits, safety training attendance, near-miss incidents reported, safety audits conducted. And I think we're all quite aware that a lot of IT companies have jumped into this and created software available for different organizations, large or small, to report this sort of data. And then they can look at how well they're doing from a leading indicator perspective here. What I really like is one of my colleagues down under, Clive Lloyd, and he's written about there are better indicators. So better lead indicators go an important step beyond the usual approach of just merely collecting data, like a safe act observation, and focus on what was actually done with it. Clive is really into looking at caring. So he says it also distinguishes those from who are going through the motions to those who are actively care. Some of the measures leading indicators he talks about are look at safety improvements made based on workforce suggestions per month, or incidents findings communicated within 2 weeks of closeout, or proven actions implemented within 1 to 3 months of incident finding communicated. So it's not just, so you're actually walking the talk as opposed to just talking the talk on that one there. Zach, what have you found? Are you using leading indicators at your company?
So when I came to Mobile Track, the metric system we had set up was only really covering near misses, and what was being captured under near misses was any property damage or a true near miss. Then we had injuries on the other side. Since then, I've split things out a little bit more clearly, but for overall metrics. But I've also recently introduced my leading indicator, because more from the near miss standpoint, because nobody got hurt, no property was seriously damaged. They were tracking that as a leading indicator to drive corrective actions. We've since introduced a new incident tracking, which we're calling good catches, because no event has actually occurred yet, but we're recognizing the hazard a lot quicker and taking action to improve upon it. So there's my metric, as it is, of here's the incident, the event of hazard recognition, here's our corrective action, no property, no event that we're reacting to. There's no goals or quotas tied to this to prevent that metric fixation, but I've also started switching out how I present that data. Instead of presenting it in a graph form of up and down or bar graphs to track counting, I've rotated it 90 degrees, because I found that bar graphs rotated on a horizontal display eliminates that fixation on what's higher, growing more versus less. It's just psychological, but it works.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of this is that we're identifying these risks a lot quicker. We're identifying these hazards a lot quicker. We're getting the engagement from the operators, because they're the ones who are going, hey, I've got a problem. And it may have been that problem that has been normalified to the point that we think that this is supposed to be this way. And some people are going, it really doesn't have to be this bad. We don't have to put ourselves in this situation. If we don't take these actions, we can make it better. But the biggest value that I've gotten out of this implementation is the cultural change. And we're not calling it safety culture or we're calling it just the culture of our organization, because that's what's different from organization to organization. But we can create the culture that we're focused on improving our operations to become more safe, to become more efficient, to become more have a higher level of quality out of the whole process. And understanding these awarenesses are not failures when we have a recognition of a hazard. It is moving it up. And so that's the upside of what I'm getting. The downside is I've created more work for myself, but that's okay. As long as I'm busy and we're making progress, I've got upper leadership bought in that they're fine with having, quote unquote, large numbers of reports of incidences when, as long as we're driving for that corrective action, we're going to get better.
Yeah, I love your message shift from what did you or what are you doing to tell me about it. Because, you know, we've had this thing about management by walking around for years and years and years. And the question I always ask, when you walk around, manager, what are you doing? Because my personal history was a bit about, oops, when I used to run line crews, I would do that. I would show up when the crew was on the job. They would be working, and I worked in the electric utility business. They would come down the pole and then meet with me, and then we would have a chat, whatever, then I would leave. Then I was noticing our monthly productivity numbers were going down. So I had a session saying, well, why are numbers going down? And one of them had the courage to say, well, Gary, because you keep visiting us, we're in the middle of doing work. So we stopped work to come down to chat with you. And I'm going like, oh my God. So like, what am I doing here? Okay, thank you for that. It was really good. But you know what? Like you said, we needed a culture so that these fellows were very open. They could tell me that. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that I was the problem. I was causing the productivity figures to go down. I
That was
also
the
like to
biggest
think
thing.
about tell me about it. Because now we like to say, as leader, don't go out and visit your, your troops, the guys and the gals, and tell a story. You're better off to tell me a story, what you have done. Because then the word gets around that, oh, Zach, Gary, Scott, I'd like to tell them stories, and so that they can learn, understand, and maybe make changes to make things better. Again, it's that openness that we want, and that communication, it's got to flow kind of both ways on that one there. So
Yes, that's
yeah, go ahead.
that's what I'm seeing. Is at first it was more of, well, the safety guy only shows up, or the safety person only shows up when there's a problem. But just by going out and interacting, and when we did have an incident, it was like, okay, what can we do to make this better? It wasn't pointing a finger at the operator or the individual, because like you wanted to be successful, so I'm taking that assumption, and I've asked everyone to make sure that my assumptions are still correct, that they want to be successful in their operations. Then we just move on to educating and improving the process. And that has what has changed to where now we can actually talk about the hazards we're living with versus being quiet about it.
Yeah, exactly. So my kind of learnings from this is you get the feedback. And the reason why you want the feedback is because we want to learn. And I know we've had other people on the show, Scott, where they said, well, either you're going to punish or you're going to learn. I think we want to learn. So that's what, so you want that feedback, and you really want that feedback to willingly, voluntarily be given to you, as opposed to like, give me feedback. Now, I would also meant to mention that compliance is typically a lag indicator. Well, what we're getting with lead indicators, we're getting attitude. And attitude is things that you can't observe, you can't measure. We can see behaviors, but we can't see what's inside a person's head, which is attitude. And if we can find the attitude they've got is positive and it's looking at trying to be safe and successful, then that's what we need to kind of encourage and support. And attitudes expressed in stories voluntarily shared about good and bad experience, that's why we like to talk a bit about stories. Now, things that I've noticed too is on the downside, though, of course, is that you do need this level of psychological safety in your organization. Fairly clearly what you've got going, Zach, and kudos to you, you've got people willing to share stories, and there is no fear of retribution. I can't say that's true for a lot of organizations, and I will maybe throw that question out, Scott, to the viewers. What's your level of psychological safety in your organization? Are people willing to share stories, or are they worried about punishment, retribution? And that's not just about leadership. It's also about your fellow workers as well. You know, are they going to go like, yeah, don't mention that to them. No, that's stupid, whatever. That doesn't support psychological safety. Now, just to, again, go back to Kinevin framework, this is where we position lagging and leading metrics. What we see is that the lag metrics, they're over typically in the chaotic domain, because quite often they tell us we've had a failure in the chaotic domain, and this is what we're reporting. It's an accident, it's an injury, it's an equipment failure. What we're really interested in these lead metrics, which can signal that we may be close to the edge, maybe nearing a tipping point, but we're not there yet. So we can do something about it. And we can maybe move that operating point, the red X, move it back where it's away from that boundary in the Kinevin framework. And that's how quite often I will use the Kinevin framework and talk to crews. Where do you think our operating point red X is right now? And if they kind of put a dot near the boundary, I'm going like, oh, I think we got to do something to move it away from that. What can we do about that? And the ways that we do that, and there's a couple of ways, this is what we're suggesting. Remember earlier I said that safety improvement projects tend to be trial and error experiments in the complex domain. This is the sort of methodology we'd like to suggest people do. And I suspect you guys, maybe Zach, you're doing this. I'm just using the Kinevin framework to describe what's happening. Well, you notice that red X is where the operating point is. That may become because somebody has given you feedback. It's really close to the edge. So the proactive decision is to find a new solution that moves, let's say, the operating point further away to green check mark. How do we do that? What we do is that we assemble an improvement team, some people call them learning teams, to discover a better way. So they develop some ideas and they test them. But they don't know which idea is going to work. So maybe they try a few of them. Let's try this, let's try that, let's bring in this one, let's talk to other people. They test them. Then they take them out and introduce them to the workers. And then they monitor. They don't measure, they monitor how people respond. They learn what could work or not work. And then they reach an agreement. Oh, there's a solution that we can do, which is going to be different. And now we're going to give it to the experts in the complicated domain because they need to document and implement that in a clear domain. And that may require, okay, we need to set up something where we do a short training session. It could be part of a monthly safety meeting where it says, we used to do this. We're going to do this now because it's a better way of doing things. If they wanted to, they could show up this Kinevin framework and show, we're close to this red X mark. We want to move it back to the green. You guys okay with that? This is what I think it's going to work and how we're going to do that. That's how the methods that we're using for safety improvement projects. I think you had one yourself, didn't you, Zach? Can you tell us about that?
So I'll talk about the one from my previous experience working in a food manufacturing. We were a cheese processing plant. and we had these stacks of cheese that had to drain. We called them a drying room, and the whey would drain out of the cheese into these troughs, and the stacks would move down a rail system. And occasionally these carts would get off track and drop an entire stack of cheese and wouldn't stay on the rails. So we had to trial and error come up with a way to straighten out the rails, for one, to get so the trolley would track true. And then the other was to get the wheels to self-align. So even if the rail deviated, causing the trolley to come out of alignment, it would self-correct as you're pulling it. So, and it's all mechanical. There's no sensors or anything involved. But it took us a couple times of going through and setting up the process. On top of that, there was a air supply system to raise and lower the stacks of cheese as it moved down the draining tables. And we had to implement a fixed regulator into the system, so that way we couldn't overcharge the bags too quickly, so it would lift up more evenly and we wouldn't jostle the stack, because there was no real way of securing everything and keep it moving like a stack of dominoes, more or less. So it was just, but in order to make this whole process work, we had to pull in the operators that were doing the job and to better understand the hazards, because we were getting reports of individuals being struck by a stack of trays, or a stack of trays being lost because it toppled over when nobody was there. And so we were getting these reports, but to truly understand that it was due to the rails, the wheels, and the air system that was causing all the problems that we were having, we could have just said, well, it's the operator, but instead we drove it back to the operations of the system to make it easier for them to be successful. And by implementing those things, so they wouldn't have to check and make sure that the air pressure was set appropriately. We just had a fixed regulator, so you could hit it with 120 psi and it was regulating it down to 30 psi to inflate the bags appropriately.
Cool, cool. All right. So when we had Heather on the show last time, I think we showed this diagram. So Zach, you haven't seen this one. Yeah, this is one here. So what you experienced in your cheese drying event was you actually had incidents. So you landed in the chaotic domain. But what you did is that, okay, you've kind of stabilized the situation, made it safe, but then you decided, okay, we need to probe as opposed to analyze. What's a better way of doing things? Because quite often when we analyze, we start looking at who do we want to blame, right? It comes into like, is it human behavior? That's what we talked about with Heather and how she's trying to move away from the search for blame, asking the who question first, where really the who question shouldn't even be answered or asked. It should be really, let's look at the system conditions. Let's look at the wreck. And this is where you started to probe. And then as you're probing, you discover that, oh, we now have to adjust the air. And all these things start occurring. And you're so bang on saying a bunch of experts in a room by themselves can't do that. So this improvement team, if you want to call it a team or a learning team, that requires the people that actually do the work as well. And so I really like that example. Did you have another one, or is that the one you just want? I know you shared this with me. Is there another one that you had, or?
So the other one that I had, very similar, but this was a good catch situation where we perform a process where we have to hook up equipment to the back of a ADT, an articulating dump truck that's been modified to accept our equipment. And these individuals were standing on a ladder and kind of standing between the ladder and a set of wheels, and they're like, this isn't exactly the safest way of doing it. We're at a high risk of falling. Can we just get a platform entered in built onto the truck? And we came up with a design, and we said we could do this. And the complication side was we couldn't modify the truck, so we had to figure out a way to bolt it on, and we were very successful in it. And to date, we have not had an incident where somebody would fall off. After designing the platform, we said, oh, well, let's add in some handrails and make this a little bit more safer, and put some guardrails up so we can't fall off. And so we just improved upon that process even further. And moving in your example there, that X a little bit further away and closer to the check mark versus closer to the chaotic line.
Yeah. So this diagram does show, like, it sounds like a start and finish project from red X to green check mark. But as you've really said, it's really kind of like a cycle. It's just a continuous loop that you hit a green check mark, then you go, oh, well, we can still get better. Then you go back in the complex domain and say, let's look at guardrails. Now bring that back, and if you have to adjust documentation, you do so. So it is a bit of a continuous loop, and I think that's how we want to see safety improvement anyways, as this ongoing, continuous improvement thing, as opposed to just, one-off projects. Okay, so we pride ourselves in this show in being pragmatic with ideas that we can put in practice now. So let's go into Scott's last question is, how can we adapt a performance system that enables safety, not danger, to emerge? So let me explain that. We know that the ultimate goal of metrics is to help management know what they should do next. So this is not about management controlling worker behaviors. It's about management adapting system conditions, enabling workers to choose to behave in a way that enables safety to emerge. So what we're going to do now is Zach and I are just going to chat about different things that you could do in order to enable safety to emerge. So Zach, why don't you start off?
Well, for me, enabling safety rather than danger means that we need to rethink, why are we tracking a safety performance, safety metric? If our system is built on rewards, punishments, quotas, goal-driven metrics, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure and adding to our metrics. As Mueller had said in his book, even the best measures are subject to corruption or goal diversion. So, we have to stop this managing safety by the numbers, and instead focus on the operations that created those numbers. Just like if we're use a sports analogy of whether we're playing, and I'm gonna say it, football, Canadian and American style, is whether you're on the pitch or you're on the gridiron, it's the play that makes the score. It's not the score that makes the play. And we always are trying to manage the safe operations almost backwards of this. And that's where we have to stop and get better at this. And then when we're looking at our metrics, is that when we're trying to move safety forward in improving the operations, it tends to be pitched to the operators as a priority, which again sends an undertone message of, well, it's a priority today, it's number one today, but tomorrow, because we're behind our schedule, it's going to take third place anyway. It has to become that value. And despite getting sold out to production pressures all the time, the operations have to come from a presence of effective defenses and controls, and not from that scoreboard. So just like the ADT example, the controls and defenses that we put in place was building a platform. That was the control that got us off of the ladder. The defenses was putting the guardrails on that platform. So we were able to build off of that versus saying, well, we have a 0, so we don't need to worry about it. Culture isn't something that we can measure from that spreadsheet. We have to get away from the screen and looking at the spreadsheets and start looking at proactive behaviors and have better decision making. My system doesn't work in a different facility, the one that I have here. I can't use this in another place. I can take some concepts of it and apply it there, but I can't take it and apply it somewhere else as a verbatim or as a cookie cutter metric, one size fits all. The goal is to create the metrics that are designed to truly inform and improve our judgment of whether the operation is intrinsically safe enough for our processes. And then the cost of collecting the metrics has to play into it as well. Am I spending more time manipulating and using that in tongue-in-cheek and also in the true sense, the data to create the metric graph that I want to show, or am I actually out there on the floor looking as to, like, I had an incident, what happened? Tell me about the information, how we can do it better. What do you wish you had known before you had this event occur? And then build off of that. The more we measure, the greater our chance of having marginal costs of measuring exceeding the benefits of what we're hoping to even gain. Too many performance metrics cause cognitive overload and enable danger in the form of anger, frustration, and risk of sabotage. And sometimes even spending so much money in chasing recognition awards like is it VVP or VPP by OSHA to say have a plaque on the wall happens to be dipped in the blood of many people that had to be injured to even get to that point, or ends up getting painted over in blood because we don't want to tarnish our plaque that we have on the wall. It has to become, are we looking at it from an extrinsic rewards point of view, or are we looking at it from an intrinsic motivation of how is this going to help drive me to be successful outside of work? And that's where I usually try to drive that focus with the operators, is find out what are they thinking about when they're at work? Because I know they're not thinking about work. They're thinking about that afternoon or evening time when they get to leave work at the end of the day. They're thinking about that upcoming weekend, their upcoming vacation, the upcoming holiday. And I go, okay, so you got plans for this weekend? You got plans for tomorrow? Is what I always ask the operators when it's a Friday or a Wednesday. And because I know it, they're thinking about it. I get them thinking about it again. And I go, so what are you doing right now that's going to make sure that that plan happens? And they tend to pause and think and make it better. Then they'll come Monday, everybody's, needing that coffee to get going. And so how was the weekend? Because you were thinking about it coming in on a Monday. You came off of a great weekend. You were still thinking about it. So let's make sure that weekend happens again by working safely as we possibly can, starting Monday.
Really, really good. I'll just add to that last one because you made me think about the power of ritual and really forming habits. And yeah, let's talk about your nice, great weekend. Great. Now let's put on your safety harness. Let's put on your work boots. By doing that, you get them out of that framework of thinking about the weekend and into a framework of mind. And that's really, really important. And there's been studies done that even putting on a seatbelt or putting on your safety harness, that just activates your mind in a different way. Now you're focused on safety. So these are small psychological things, as you mentioned, Zach, that's important. So I'm going to add a few to that. And some of those things we've already talked about, but I'm just going to add a bit of research behind that. If somebody does mention it, people may go like, well, where did you get that from? So if you are obligated to use OSHA-like measures, and you maybe have to for WCB insurance premium reasons, that's okay. Use as an outcome that I think, Zach, you said it, and I'll say it too, don't make them a target. Now, if somebody says, well, why not? You can say, well, for one thing, Goodhart discovered this, Professor Charles Goodhart, and this goes way, way back when he discovered what government was doing, was trying to regulate using these things. And he says, once you do that, there's a whole bunch of unreliability that comes up. Dave Snowden also said anything made explicit will sooner or later be gamed for survival purposes, and that need will corrupt practice and people, as we've already talked about. Marilyn Strathern, I think she said it best, and this is what she said. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And this slide I happened to pick up, and there's a reference there, just looks at different things. And I'll use one example, which was called the cobra effect. So they had a problem in India where they're having too many cobra snakes that were biting people and killing people. So the government thought, let's do something about that. Let's have people kill snakes, bring their head in, and we will pay for their heads. The intent sounded really, really good. People were bringing them in, but then they looked a little kind of like, let's pull back the shades and have a look and see what's happening. And they're going like, oh my gosh, people are breeding cobra snakes, raising them so they can cut off their heads and get money for them. So immediately the government says, no, you can't do that. We need to stop the program. Of course, as soon as they stopped the program, all the people that were farming them, let them go into the wild. Oops, unintended consequences. There's quite a few stories about this one, and we laugh now, but at the time, there was really good intentions, but you get these unintended negative consequences. And of course, we already talked a bit about gaming, and people are good for gaming. We do that for survival quite often, but sometimes we do it for, because we try to maybe make more money. And gaming typically involves numerical scores or ratings, judging human performance. So what do? Well, we can underreport, as you said, Scott, or Zach. We can also distort the data. We can only go deeper. We can also bribe people and fraud. I just recently brought my car in for servicing, and and at the end, the service manager said, you will get a survey, Gary, and we really would like you to score 10 out of 10 because it really helps us out here. So I was left and going like, do I give this guy a 10? Or if I give him a 9, is he going to get fired? So I was kind of, I was almost said there, well, do you want to give me some free, free car washes for the next 6 months? Then I'll give you a 10. I didn't go that far because I'm not that type of guy. But you can see how you can get into that gaming situation. Well, don't go there. Go back. In fact, I wanted to respond to, they say there, back to the company says here, you should not be rating people, your workers, on this, because I can really fix the numbers here, right? And of course, there's just things called downright fraud as well, just faking the numbers so you look good. You mentioned about intrinsic reward. Well, gaming can also occur if you've got a pay-per-performance system in place. So you viewers that have a pay-per-performance system, have a look at that, because ask yourself the question, are your people motivated by this intrinsic reward? In other words, you're going to win a cash bonus, or else you're going to get prizes. Or are your people intrinsically motivated? Pride of work, working together. That's what really probably drives it. And, as you said, Zach, intrinsically motivated people, I think, are better than intrinsic reward. Now, one of the things I discovered was don't set a target that doing nothing can achieve. This gets into this whole realm of zero harm, which we can't get into in great detail. My view of zero harm is it's good for a sense of direction, but don't set it as a goal. Right? I'm going to go a bit further for so many people and pick up from Zach. I suggest you push back on using industry standard metrics for benchmarking purposes. I did a lot of benchmarking in my previous career. It does send a false sense of security. Like, how helpful is, hey, we're no worse than others are. Would you want that? I think you would want to use the time to collaborate and share improvement info rather than numbers in some report, some benchmarking report that seems to be good. Now, I understand that. I know I'm going to get in trouble because there are a lot of companies that love benchmarking and share it. I am now just saying challenge and question the practice of being involved. And can you do something better with your money? I loved your analogy about football. I'm going to use one, baseball. And what I want to do is suggest that you communicate with the decision makers. And I love the idea of doing the horizontal chart as opposed to the up and down chart. But you want to give them a platform that matches the pace and cadence of the business. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're a stable, slow changing, quite predictable sort of business, that's the ordered system as we call it. And I think a scorecard is fine for that. But now if you're in a repeatable business, but there are times of uncertainty, you're probably in the order and complex. And this is what we've been talking about. You need a scoreboard. And lastly, if you're in this really volatile, unpredictable, dynamic environment, man, you're into complex every day, you need a dashboard. So what does that mean? So what does that help? Well, a scorecard says the game's over. You can't do anything about it. You lost 5-4. A scoreboard says, well, it's the bottom of the fifth, and you're down 2 runs. What do you want to do about that? And of course, the dashboard is that you're right at that right now. So what do you want to do about that? Whether you have a dashboard or scoreboard or scorecard, you have to decide that what's the best for your pace and cadence of the business and the context. Now, if you want to go into a dashboard sort of thing, because quite often organizations that stress decisions, they've got to be data-driven. Well, what you can suggest is that why don't you be data? Well, why don't we be evidence-driven? And why don't we use the stories that workers are telling every day? I'm going into the field and I say, tell me about what's going on. And they give it to me in a form of a story. Why don't we maximize it, use that? Stories really are narrative data, and they provide content so much, much better than numbers. And what we can do with the numbers is, as you said, Zach, we can start looking within the stories. What are these patterns? These patterns of maybe are desirable that we want, or maybe patterns that are not desirable, and we got to do something about that. I also want to say that you want to, as we talked about, engage the people whose safety performance is being measured and monitored. And your ADT story told that works well. So what we want to do is we really want to work where people being measured believe in its worth, and we want to gather their stories with the value of top-down or standardized metrics here. So we're just at the top of the hour now, so let's end this thing, Zach, with 3 takeaways. Do you have a takeaway that you want to leave with somebody?
Sure, I'll lead off with metrics that we're using are measuring exactly what we were designed to measure.
Yeah, okay, all right. Why don't you do the next one as well, and I'll do the very last one.
All right, and then the other takeaway we got from this is that challenge our status quo. What is it that we are really needing to measure? Are we needing to measure the total number of X type of incidents? Or are we needing to measure the subset of that X type of incidences? What caused it to happen?
Good. Okay. And let me do the very last one. Every safety performance measurement system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. If you're happy, congratulations. If you want to improve, then change the system conditions to allow people to enable safety to emerge. So with that, Scott, over to you.
Yeah, well, really great conversation today. I think that everybody can relate to maybe that historical type of measurement system that you referred to, and hopefully people can come away with the new mindset and looking at instead of what was the comment? As soon as the measurement becomes
A target,
target, yeah, then it's
no longer measure.
yeah. So I love that. So thanks so much, Zach, for joining us today, and Gary for leading
Thank
us
you.
through another great conversation.
Thanks, and see you around the block.
All right. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you.